in this, that if I wouldn't want this to keep happening, I don't think we can treat this as a one-time event. Hopefully it is, but these things may happen more in the future. So I'm kind of thinking that more for the future, that in our agreements, that we have an agreement where we don't give a credit on rent unless we're closed for a certain amount of time. Because if we're closed for 4 or 5 months, then I do think there's some fixed costs that might be going down. But for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, even 10 weeks, I don't think our expenses go down. And I guess what I'm suggesting is, not for this particular request, but maybe we should put this back to committee with your committee, Heather, coming up with maybe adding a policy to these ahead of time, being proactive on this instead of reactive, so that in the future when this happens, everyone knows that unless we're closed for 4 months, there won't be any kind of, it'll be in the contract and there wouldn't be any kind of forgiveness of rent. Does that still?
Excuse me, I'm sorry to barge in on this. This is Joanne.
Yeah.
There was a glitch and I got kicked off of the YouTube. I have passed the meeting controls over to Ted. He was able to get back onto YouTube, but I am not sure at what point we lost the YouTube connection. So I apologize, but I would ask, especially related to the public comments, if we could just readdress that, since I'm not sure that, I don't know if that was showing or not at that time.
It is, and I'll repeat that because it is important. So Christy Salzgiver submitted written comment for public comment that was provided to each of the board members regarding an unfortunate incident at the Shawnee Mission Park off-leash area where her dog escaped from the fencing and was hit by a car and killed. And staff is meeting with Ms. Salzgiver tomorrow morning to go over and to review and look at the fencing and the condition of the off-leash dog area, and then come back and make recommendations. And Ms. Salzgiver, if you're listening, we appreciate you taking the time. It's very unfortunate that your dog was killed, and I personally feel sad about that. But we will look at that and see what comes of it. And thank you again for your comments.
Thank you. And then for note, I would just like to mention that the consent agenda has been approved with removal of Parks Golf Courses 2, the T-Mobile Second Amendment to an existing lease, which was pulled from the consent agenda for further discussion, which then, Baru, I don't know if you want to summarize your comments.
Okay, first of all, the only item that officially was pulled was CUL 1, which has the Historic Society. And if PGC 2 is supposed to be pulled, we'll have to.
No, my apologies. I was incorrect. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So you're asking me to summarize? I think I can do that pretty quickly. I'm not opposed to this. I'm suggesting that we make it clear this is a one-time action, and that I'm also suggesting that Heather and her committee come up with a policy so that everybody, and then we communicate that to all of our renters for the future, and that our policy should include, or Heather's committee consider the idea is that there should be a minimum amount of time or threshold before we waive rent in the future. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm okay with this as long as everyone realizes it's a one-time. It's for this one time. It doesn't go for any future actions. At the same time, I'm asking that Heather's committee consider a policy on this.
I think that we can look at each of these contracts as they come up, and make some decisions, Steve. Like I said, this is more of a facility rental. So I think different contracts will have, I don't know that we need one policy for all of our contracts, is what I'm saying. I think we need to look at what services are provided for each contract. So for, say, like the Aquatic Center, that's a different contract. The Roland Park Community Center is a different contract. So now that we've been through this experience, perhaps that's something that we need to think about as we renew every contract with regards to stoppage for whatever reason, whether it be weather related or, you know, natural disaster or pandemic.
I understand that. I think that's a good response. Then what would you think, Heather, about the idea? I still think it's important to communicate this is a one-time forgiveness of rent, and this does not indicate our feelings if we do this in the future. That's number one.
So I think we can say we've made the decision to do this time, that at contract renewal, we will be adding language.
I like that.
So I would entertain a motion regarding CUL1.
I would move CUL1 with the added language that Heather's committee, the cultural committee, come up with wording for a future contract when this one that includes a minimum time. I like the way Heather said it. The future contract includes a minimum time that we're down. Does that make sense, Heather?
Yes, I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the COVID-19 status and 2020 budget impacts. Noel?
Well, good evening. Glad to be here and be able to make another presentation. Joanne, are you going to steer for me or would you like me to display?
I'll be happy to have you display, Noel.
Okay. All right, just a moment here while I get this going. Okay, should see the presentation now. So we'll go ahead and get started. And this is very similar to what we presented in May. So at this point, we have not been informed of any changes in funding for the general fund. So this presentation on COVID-19 will continue to focus on the enterprise fund. So we have here information through May, and what we've showed here is the graphical depiction of the enterprise fund by month. And you'll see there for 19, how we showed last month, that revenue in 2019 during normal operations, revenue outpaces expenses. And when you compare that against 2020, we see that May had similar results as what we saw in April, where expenses were outpacing revenue. So that was what we were anticipating. And just at the bottom there, kind of the bottom left-hand side, we've got the numbers that apply to the year to date, and we'll kind of go through those on the next slide, but we've got January through May actuals comparing 2019 to 2020. And so you can see there just between those 2 years for that period of time, we're down significantly in 2020. But when we look at it year to date, just for 2020 here on the next slide, we've got our projections. So the first column there, the March through May projections, this is what we presented in May. So wanted to keep that consistent so that you saw what we presented in May, what we were projecting. Staying within that column, we kind of look towards the bottom of the slide. We have a shortfall where we have actual January through May, and then we have projected June. So if we look at January through May, how we're doing for 2020, we're at a loss in the enterprise fund of just under $1.1 million. So if you remember back in May, I was kept reporting that our projected shortfall for the same period would be just over 1.1 million. So we hit that projection and we're just slightly under that. Not that that was necessarily good news, but at least in our projections, we were projecting correctly and accurate. So then what we've done is add to this slide that we've put in the June projection of what we project June will be. We're projecting another shortfall of about $422,000 for the month. Thankfully, in June, we've started to reopen, and so departments are starting to get back into normal practices, but a lot of those are restricted, and we're still gauging some temperatures on what patron interest is in attending events and participating in activities and those things. But so through the end of June, what our projection at this point is just over $1.5 million. And this is based on initial projections that the departments have done. And I know we talked in detail at the May meeting about looking at year to date or for the entire year of 2020 and trying to project forward a projection. We've got some very preliminary projections here, but what we really want to do is our next step is to go back to the enterprise fund departments and ask them to prepare monthly budgets for January through December so that we can get a feel for what they're thinking their activity might be, knowing that this is going to be fairly fluid and they'll have to change that as different, as they gain information each month. But we want to be able to kind of look at that and then be able to roll that into an annual calendar projection and be able to provide some more solid feedback to the board and where we think we might land. Very, very preliminary projections at this point is we're thinking that we might be at a shortfall for 2020 in the enterprise fund and somewhere between 2.5 and $3 million. This is kind of based on using some historical information from 2019, but we're very cautious in using that information because we just don't know how the remainder of 2020 will play out. So, but that's kind of what we're at this point. But I just want to point out it's a big number and definitely staff are not happy with that. We continue to look at that and explore that and figure out what different things can we do to help mitigate that. But I just want to point out some statistics where if you look at our 2020 budget, we had total budgeted revenue in the enterprise fund of almost $30 million. So it's really just about a 10% potential loss on our revenue. But if you consider that into context of we were closed for about 25% of the year. So we were closed for close to 3 months in a lot of our departments. So and that's during very busy times of our department. We had to close just before spring break and obviously, as you know, remain closed. So so if we look at that in comparison, we feel it makes it a little bit more comfortable. Still doesn't sit well with us. We still don't like that, but from that perspective, we feel like the mitigations that we put in place of furloughing staff, reducing expense spending, ceasing traveling, ceasing training, that those helped to mitigate that loss and keep that as low as possible. So kind of next steps as what we're thinking, just kind of wanted to summarize. You know, like I said, we have that projected shortfall in June, projected to be about $1.5 million at the end of June, and then potentially for the remainder of the year could reach up to that $3 million point. So what we're going to do is develop those month-to-month budgets with each of the enterprise departments, and that will definitely help staff in being able to analyze that as we move forward, and especially each month as we get actuals, we can lay that against whether we hit our planned budgets or not, and then make necessary adjustments as we move through each month. And then we want to just continue to monitor that performance and be able to continue to report to the board and communicate any next steps, whether that be back to consider forgiving any of the employee benefit transfers that we discussed last month, and also just to keep you abreast of any use of reserves that we'll have to use. And then They are also in the process of continuing to explore if there's any potential federal funding relief that we might be eligible for. There is CARE funding that has been received by the county, and the county is still developing their process of how to allocate or distribute those funds. And that should, some guidance on that should be forthcoming. And so definitely once we learn about that, we will communicate that to the board. We also have made a request into FEMA to potentially get some funding from them. And that was a request that JCPRD made independently. And we had a initial phone call with them this week. And so there sounds like there's some potential there to receive some relief. But they caution that you really should exhaust any other options that you have before coming to them, because their relief that they're providing is a little bit more limited. So we're going to continue to keep those doors open and visit with them and definitely gather information and make a claim once we know kind of what our total expenses are. And a lot of this relief funding is really focused on any additional spending that we did outside of our budget. So if it was budgeted spending, they're not going to reimburse that, which is understandable. They're going to reimburse for anything that was outside of our is basically unplanned budget spend as a result of the pandemic. And while we still try to get creative and try to figure out ways to see if we can get some coverage for our lost revenue, it's more likely we probably won't be able to, but we're going to continue to have those conversations.
Noel, this
Yes.
is Steve. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Chairman? Is it okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Clegg.
When you said you had conversations with the county relative to CARES funding?
Well, we're aware that they have funds available, and they're developing a process to determine how to allocate that out. And so we've let them know that we're interested and we want to be part of that conversation when it's determined.
Obviously, and you should be. And but what I'm going to tell, there's a lot of people knocking on the door. And I would encourage you to make sure you have your package in hand to Maury or whoever. So it's even while they're thinking about how the process is going to work.
Okay.
Face it, the county will take care of itself first. And I hope to goodness it'll take care of its agencies and related before it moves into the next phases of dealing with municipalities and other groups.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Chairman, just to give you an idea, the county has received, Joe, I think it's in the tune of about 115 million, right?
Yes, sir. 117.
117.
And if I could add, we do, as we look at expenditures and covering expenses and that sort of thing as best we can with the CARES dollars, we are considering agencies such as Parks and Recreation, just the same as a county department or other county operation.
And Noel, if you do a very good, honest submission that is well justified, I think we ought to be in pretty good shape.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Steve.
And I may, if I may, George, Commissioner Click, I appreciate that as well. And we have in fact been communicating as recent as today with Maury, and of course Joe Waters is online with us here, and are preparing to provide an outline of what those dollars are, those expenditures and our requests. So to your point, we will continue to communicate as they go through this process. So thank you.
All right. And that was what I had to present on COVID. I've got one more slide here, and this was just more for reference purposes if we had some discussion regarding the fund reserves that we have in place at the end of the year. So, so if there's not any, I'll entertain any questions. Yeah.
Noel, I had one quick question on your first slide. Expenses in 2020 are actually about $182,000 more than in 2019. Does that go directly to the additional programs we've added, such as the Olathe school program?
Yes. Are you looking at this slide that I've got displayed?
Yeah, right.
One? Okay.
So
And
expenses are 182,104 more this year than last year. I just was wondering if that
Oh.
was attributable to more programs, and in particular, the Olathe school program that we now have.
yes, yeah, definitely for this period of time. Because for Olathe out of school, we did a little bit of summer camps last year, but really that program took full force in the fall.
So that's attributes to that additional expense. Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah, great question. All right. Any other questions? The remainder of my presentation will move into the 2021 budget. And I'll go ahead and move forward on that if there's no other questions. And I know each of you received a memo from me last week regarding a couple changes that we've processed through the budget. So after a few months of bringing this forward to the board and saying there's no changes, we did have a few changes. So it was good for us to wait and be able to process those through. So I want to just walk through what those changes are and give you some perspective on those. So the one change related to motor vehicle tax funding, there was a decrease in the estimates for those. And in making that change, we also made a few other adjustments, which is normal during this process. We adjusted the budget for the mill value because it fluctuates as we go. And then we also had some late additions with a software replacement. And I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail on the next slides. And then the second revision was our planned merit increase of 3%. We reduced that down to 2%, and that's to be consistent with the county's plans for their budget. And those dollars have remained in the budget. We have just placed them in a different area of the budget, and they're earmarked for potential future use. So
my screen says reduced to 1%.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I misspeak? We budgeted at 3% originally, and we've now reduced our budget so that our merit increase is budgeted at 1%.
Yes.
Sorry about that. All right, so on the motor vehicle tax reduction, the overall reduction in the estimate was just over $214,000, and that impacts the general fund as well as the employee benefits fund. And to address this, when we start the budget process, we're given what the value of the mill is, and we equate that out to how many mills that JCPRD receives. And when we started the budget process, the county provided a mill value. And the reason being is we budget several months in advance of the county. We've had experiences even last year, kind of in the ninth inning, we had an experience where the mill value had declined. And so kind of right at the end of the process, we were scrambling around to adjust department budgets. So this year we decided to or if we have another adjustment, we don't have to go and fade the individual department budgets. We can make that adjustment more kind of on the top level. So that's what we did here. When we applied what we held back to the mills, it was actually $355,000 that we held back. It didn't. We went ahead during this process and adjusted that down. We also learned just a few weeks ago that software that we use is going to be sunsetting during 2020, and we're going to need to replace that. So we went ahead and added some funds in there to address that. And then we had an additional amount that we had not applied from that delinquency that we held back of about $80,000. And we went ahead and just put that into a capital project. It's not identified for a specific project. It's just held as uncategorized or unassigned so that we have those funds. If the mill value changes or something else comes into play before we finalize the budget in August, we could consider using those funds, or then if we don't end up using those, they're there during 2021 if we need them for a unexpected project or for a project that we have assigned that we need additional funding for. So that's how we addressed that change through the budget process. And then the second significant change that we made was to the merit. So we had planned, or we had budgeted a 3% merit, and this was in the general fund as well as the enterprise fund. So we went ahead and reduced those merits that we had planned for down to 1%. And the dollars that we have listed there for the general and enterprise funds are the dollar amounts that is the 2% that was moved. We went ahead and moved all of those out of the individual departments' personnel expenses. That was the direction of the county, and the approach that they wanted us to use is to pull that out of the personnel expenses. But we were to keep those in the overall budget. And so we placed those into a non-personnel expense line, both within the general fund and the enterprise fund. We used our admin cost centers that we have. So those dollars are just sitting there, and they have been earmarked to not be spent, so that in the future, as we progress into 2021, we can determine what the uses of those will be. There is some conversation that those could be used for merit. There's no decisions that have been made for that, but that potentially might be an option. And if we end up not using those funds, for the general fund, those dollars would roll into a project at the end of the year, which is consistent with our normal practices. Any unspent general fund dollars, we move into a project fund, and we can use those for future years. In the enterprise fund, if we don't use those dollars, we'll move that. Those will be saved and applied against the reserve. So should we end up using part of the reserve as we somewhat anticipate for 2020, we'll be able to replenish that slightly with those funds. So with those changes, what we've also provided to the board is just a view of the budget overview. This is the revised version so that you can see what those look like. For the motor vehicle, there really wasn't too much of a significant change because that was just a shifting between revenue sources. And then as well as the merit increase, not too much of a change there because we're just shifting the expenses. So overall, the bottom line just changed very slightly. And then what we also provided just for context and perspective is the budget overview that we had originally presented at the beginning of April. And this is what was included in the printed budget book. And then just want to remind everybody of the budget timeline. This has not changed from what we presented in May, but the proposed budget is to be reviewed by the BOCC at the county level on July 9th. And then JCPRD will be asked to come forward and do a budget presentation. And we have not been told what day yet. So as soon as we know that information, we'll definitely share that with the board. But we've just got those potential dates listed. And then we'll move forward with public hearings in August and issuing and approving the final budget towards the middle to late part of August. So with that, I've got here a motion and would entertain a motion by the board if everybody's comfortable at this point.
Anybody have any questions for Noel before we get to the motion? I would second Noel's comment about I would entertain a motion to approve the.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not gonna, this is Steve, I'm going to abstain on this. I'll just vote as abstention or on this one, since I'll have to deal with this as it comes before the county board.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make the motion. I move that we approve the JCPRD revised preliminary 2021 budget as presented, with the understanding that staff will bring forth budget revisions as required prior to requesting final approval in August.
Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. Bruce seconds. All those in favor? Well, is there any discussion?
George, I have a quick comment.
All, Mr. Snyder.
I will support this budget, but will note that I'm disappointed that we weren't able to come with a reduction in our budget, at least the taxpayer funded portion that provides some sort of relief to taxpayers in these times. I mean, we did have the reductions that were forced upon us by the county, which I fully support, but I wish we could have done more, but I will support the budget.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign.
Mr. Chairman, I abstain.
And Mr. Click abstains. Motion carries. We'll move into item C on the discussion and action agenda, and that's the request by White Fox Manor for a help on some repairs caused by a windstorm. Bill?
Yeah, Bill Mawson, Superintendent of Parks and Golf Courses. Thank you all for letting me have the floor for a few seconds here. This issue was brought before the board last month, and at the request of the board chair, we took it through committee with a briefing sheet that showed some issues at the White Fox Manor horse stable. And I wanted to make one quick clarification, and included in the packet were 2 years of profit loss statements from our management company, JP Management. The 2 years combined showed they had spent $48,000 in maintenance expenses. And after a further conversation with JP Management, those expenses did include maintenance of vehicles, maintenance of equipment, and not just building maintenance. So I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. When I asked specifically about what building maintenance was taking place, it was mostly routine things, minor electrical issues, nothing that really rises or rose to the occasion of being something that they should bring to us. So anyway, with that in mind, I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has. The JP Management has requested your consideration for a funding of up to $6,000 to help pay for the roof repair. It is a building that is owned by JCPRD, insured by JCPRD. But the management company does have responsibilities of maintaining the building. So it is a agreement that they agreed that they signed on to as an as is where is type structure, and damages to that structure do kind of fall on them unless it triggers an insurance claim. So I think with that, I'd be glad. Staff do recommend sharing in the expense as noted, but I would sure be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
So Bill, just for historic perspective, it's my understanding that up through 6 or 8 years ago, this was a profit and loss item on the district's profit loss, and we were showing a $50,000 or $60,000 loss per year, and the board at that time considered shutting it down, and it was determined by the board at that time that there was significant additional usage by people in the county that was providing maybe more benefit than we anticipated when we talked about shutting it down. But what we did at that time was turn the management of White Fox over to them and said, we'll give you $10,000 a year, but you've got to cover everything else. Is that pretty close to what happened?
Perfect summary, George. Just one little minor thing. We did go through a request for proposals process that JP Management was selected as actually they were the only proposal we received for taking over the management of the facility. And we do pay them $10,000 annually, which is roughly $890 a month to help as a fee to manage that facility for us. That does cap our loss annually at $10,000. And George is accurate when he said we were losing in some years more than $50,000 annually. So it was
Mr.
determined. Anyway.
Mr. Chairman, this is Steve.
Mr. Clinton.
You know what? I've listened to the issues on the horse stable effort and our equestrian area there, and I know over the years we've lost a lot of money. There's been issues on the capital needs and so forth. But I think White Horse or the folks at JP Management have really tried to help us through this to at least keep that operation moving to some level. And I think investment of $6,000 to help them with roof repair is not a major issue. And it's just I know they keep fighting just to keep themselves above water in trying to keep this facility and effort going. So I'll make a motion to approve the $6,000.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question and then a comment. Bill, is the $6,000 the total cost of the repair?
No, the cost was estimated at $12,000. So it's approximately 50% of the cost.
Okay. My concern a little bit is that we open a can of worms that if we have these situations arise, that once we've done this for one entity, that we may be expected to do it again for others. And so that's where my concern lies. Other than that, I haven't been on the board to where we've had this type of situation arise before. And I'm not real familiar with the past discussions as far as the horse stable is concerned. So I'm a little bit not knowledgeable about some of its past. So I just need a little help with that and feeling more comfortable with this ask.
Jeff, if
I would, we need a second to the motion, if somebody would second it.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Heather. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I recall, when the initial discussion came up over the stables, there's a question, as you said, of whether to close it down or not. The other issue, one of the arguments that was being used, and correct me, some of you that have been on even longer, is that the capital cost of trying to, there was a question whether or not it was worth even keeping the stables in place and tearing them down. And JP Management has come in to try to hold it together. And at the same time, with the minimal cost from our standpoint, this is kind of I think there are not many resources available for the public. And having these stables here has basically been one of the things that has helped bridge that issue for a number of years. I just hate to see them go for such a small dollar amount, see them struggle any more than they have to.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, this is Heather. I have a question. So somebody said we insure this. At what point does it have to get to before it triggers an insurance claim? If it's a 12.
I'll best to answer that, Heather. So we have a we have a deductible, or we're self-insured up to $25,000. So general rule of thumb, it has to be double the deductible before we would file a claim, if that makes sense. And even
I wanted to understand what, how close were we to the deductible amount, and whether that made sense. No, I think 6,000 is, I don't think that's going to make or break us if we used to lose 50,000 and we're only paying them 10,000 a year to manage it. It seems like I'm kind of surprised they didn't ask for the whole 12,000. So, I mean, that's
further discussion or questions?
A question for Bill Mawson. When will this contract be up for renewal?
It's renewable annually, and we usually renew that in September.
Okay, thank you. I will support this. I guess my preference would be that next time the contract rolls around, we figure out a way that when we add additional money to this, that there's a way that we can get reimbursed for it under certain scenarios. I don't know exactly what that would look like. My hesitation now, as it was 6 or 8 years ago when we first debated this, is that we're basically subsidizing with taxpayers a private operation, and now they're coming to us to get more of a subsidy, and I just have issues with that. But the cost that we're expending has been kept low enough, but there's still the principle of it sitting out there that bothers me.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Any further questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, yes, this is Steve Baru. I remember all the hearings and public hearings we had and all the people that came out and the last minute plan that came together to take over White Fox and took it off our hands basically. And I actually think they've done a great job and done I mean, at the time I thought, how are they ever going to do this? But they've done it over the last 3 or 4 years. And I feel like this is a small token of what we could have been doing if we hadn't have taken that direction. So I actually feel very good about this $6,000 because it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Go into reports. Jeff, Executive Director.
Yes, thank you, George. First of all, I just want to thank Noel especially for leading us through the budget process. And as we've been going through that, addressing our shortfalls or concerns with the 2020 budget. Noel and her team have done a terrific job. The superintendents, the managers here, supervisors, all have worked very, very hard on this budget. And so we appreciate your support and certainly appreciate everybody's hard work on that. Few things to share with you this evening. As you know, we were in the process for the deputy director search, replacing my old position, and we had to hit the pause button on that as we were in the middle of that process and when COVID-19 hit our community. And so, you know, certainly in respect to the finalists in that process, as well as their communities, and the fact that we had a travel restriction in place, we needed to pause that for a bit. But we're in the position now where we can start moving forward. The position has been vacant for almost 9 months now, believe it or not. And we are scheduled to continue that process. And I appreciate the board chair and the vice chair participating with us as we enter those final stages. And I certainly look forward to sharing more details with the full board here soon. Believe it or not, we celebrated here a little bit here last week. The Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center turned 3. It's hard to believe that we've had 3 years of operation out there, but our team's doing a terrific job. And we celebrated by reopening to the community here recently. And already our summer camps, it's my understanding that all sessions are full. So it's great to see that the building has come back to life again and being appreciated by our citizens. And at the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center, there will be a new exhibit in the art exhibit space that will reopen soon. It's Resilience, Reflection, and Rebuilding, which is will be an exhibit that artists will have working with the Museum Foundation and the Arts Council of Johnson County as they reflect upon COVID-19 and the response to that. Our rentals have picked back up again, and this includes Milldale Farms. I'm pleased to share with you that we are booked for every weekend now through the rest of the year, with the exception of Thanksgiving and Christmas weekends. So folks are coming back out and expressing great interest in renting the facilities we have available to them as well. In follow-up to the board, and as promised, Superintendent of Recreation, Rhonda Pollard, and myself met with the Shawnee Mission School District to discuss the possibilities and explore options of reopening the Shawnee Mission School District Aquatic Center sooner than what they had announced as a September reopening date. It was a very, very positive meeting with part of their executive team. And we discussed some of the guidelines that we had crafted for reopening, and they were received well. That information was shared with their full executive team and was also received well. And they are now expressing some of the lifeguard training that we would need to do that got paused as we've been going through COVID-19. So good news there on that update. And then speaking of COVID-19, JCPRD continues to follow the recovery plan. I tried to keep the board updated on that as we continue to reopen our services. And per the strong recommendation from our health officials, we do continue to follow voluntarily the guidelines and timelines of the Ad Astra plan. So we are currently in phase 3, but we do expect to enter into that phase out position as of this coming Monday. As a result of reopening our services, most of our regular staff that were placed on furlough have either been brought back or are scheduled to be brought back as the need for their support requires it. So we're certainly welcoming back much of our team that has been placed on furlough for some time now. And certainly want to recognize that the last 100+ days have been incredibly disruptive and challenging for us as it has for our entire community and our nation. But I must publicly say how very proud I am of our JCPRD team as we have worked so hard collectively through this sensitive time. And of course, in true JCPRD fashion, everyone has jumped into this to work through it, and I'm certain will continue to do so. And even Commissioner Rubish has been sewing and sewing and sewing as she's made masks for staff that have had interest in some of those. So special thanks to her and all of the colorful patterns that she has brought to us as well. So
Happy to do it.
With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So
Jeff, sorry, George.
So Jeff is the exhibit at the Arts and Heritage Center is the portion of it that deals with racism in the county, still part of the exhibit.
I might yield to Susan to speak on particulars about exhibits in the Arts and Heritage Center. If you're there, Susan.
Yes, Susan Mong, Superintendent of Culture. And yeah, thank you for your question. That is a part of the exhibit, the main Johnson County Museum exhibit, and that is a story that is continues to be told, and our tours that we provide also highlight that story of Johnson County. So certainly that's been of interest as of late, and we've had our staff interviewed a few times about that. And I suspect we'll continue to have interest in that story as well.
Okay, I guess that was my point, to make sure that the existence of that story is out there, because it was there before it became such a hot issue within the last month.
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Martin?
Jeff, do we have any indications of numbers of loss of staff or employees due to the COVID situation?
Yeah, as far as staff resigning as a result of COVID-19.
Or just loss of employees that we don't think are going to be coming back? Sure.
We have had just some minor, the numbers have been very minor. One that comes to mind for me as it relates to our full-time staff. Of course, we had a number of seasonal positions that were also placed on furlough. And for as long as this has taken place, some of their seasons have come and gone. And so there won't be a need to bring any of them back until their seasons happen again, perhaps even next year. But we have, our folks have worked very, very closely with all members of our team, placed on furlough, on leave, or working extra hours here to continue operations. And we've been very pleased with the responses so far, but there are some cases that we're working through as they come up as well.
Jeff, I was curious about what the current thinking is on the Kill Creek Tower.
Yeah, we're
excited. I went out there yesterday, and you can see a long way from the top of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you made it up there, George. Paul, I appreciate the question. We anticipate just softly opening the facility for folks to enjoy here very, very soon, especially internally. We talked about that as we enter phase out. We do still want to have a celebration and recognize the family that contributed towards that, but that will require some traveling, and we want to be sensitive to when they're comfortable with that. and we'll work closely with them to identify a date, and certainly invite all of you and the many others that have been a part of that. But we'll have a soft opening here, likely when we enter the phase out phase here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Any other questions of Jeff? Fred, do you have any comments?
No report, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Klicka?
Mr. Chairman, last Thursday, the board has now started to convene back in open session at the chambers, and there's been a growing concern that we were losing touch with our folks, and that it was important to get back and start having some visibility, especially over all the stuff that's been going on here for the past couple months. So we're back at it, and we're starting to have our committee meetings and things, and off of Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klicka. And that was going to be my comment in terms, I want to get the discussion, at least a little bit of discussion going on having Zoom meetings versus having in-person meetings. I know this week at our pre-board meeting, Jeff and I met in person. Leslie chose not to, which I respect. And I know Steve has made a comment about he's not comfortable just yet attending an in-person meeting. Jeff, can you tell us if we elect to have an in-person meeting, but all of the board members are not comfortable being that, can we have more than one person come in on a conference call offsite?
We can, George. I visited with Ted Tartnar to discuss some of the options that we have here. And like we have done for an individual board member when they were unable to be on site for a meeting, we can conference call in multiple board members if there's ever a time where there's even more than one that are unable to attend. We don't have the technology or the capabilities of doing that through Zoom as we have in-person meetings. We're not set up for those conference Zoom sessions in our boardroom, but we absolutely could have conference call folks in, should that be their desire.
I know things are fairly fluid. I know some of the infection rates are going up in certain places. What's the board's thought on returning to in-person meetings?
Mr. Chairman, I think overall, I recognize some folks may have some difficulties, but I think it's time to start moving it from a public perception, transparency side. We need to be a little bit more as open as we can. And since we are not on technical, and the guidelines basically say we're phasing out of this by next week, it seems for our next meeting, which is a month from now, we should be in okay shape. If something unusual happens, we can revert back.
Would we still try and do social are you guys doing social distancing, Steve?
Well, there's still going to be it's recommended that we do a certain amount of social distancing. And what we've done at the commission is space out the board members and extended a little bit more distance between the board members. And then staff is working from the table in the front. And then we have limited folks from the public come in on a limited basis, as they need to start talking. So we just don't have a whole lot of folks in the room.
And you've got plexiglass dividers.
Yeah, that's terrible. But I mean, how to promote, don't even go there, Joe, because you don't want to start that discussion. But that tends to it doesn't promote a lot of continuity, or what should I say, camaraderie among the board members.
George, my thoughts
We'll be
are
a
that,
month from now. Right. Pardon me?
so George, my thoughts are that if staff is in the building and that we're serving patrons, that we ought to, like Steve said, give it a try as long as we can be spread out and do it in a safe manner.
Other
Mr.
comments?
Chair,
Yes.
speaking for myself, I'm ready to get back into in-person meetings. I don't mind having the distancing, and I have no qualms about wearing a mask. So I'm ready to get back to in-person meetings myself, though.
I'll make you a mask, Jeff. What do you want?
Oh, I've got masks.
Make him a KU mask.
No.
Mr. Chairman, do we need a motion to say we're going to start reconvening, barring no unusual circumstances, that we'll start convening a month from now back in the boardroom?
This is Steve Baruch. I think we can leave this up to the chair to decide. I think he's got an idea that seems to be the consensus. I'd like to just leave it in his hands in case things change or there's a rebound. And so keep it as
I'm
flexible
fine.
as possible.
I'm good with that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Since I attended the meeting 2 days ago in person, so yeah, you see where I'm at. Okay. I respect the people that are not comfortable attending in person, and I would encourage the people, if we do have an in-person meeting, I would encourage those people that are not comfortable to attend by way of a conference call. Those are the only comments I had. Any other board member comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Steve. I have a couple comments or questions from the staff reports, if that's all right.
Sure.
First, just one comment. I noticed our attendance, even though through these, it's been kind of dark times, our attendance in all of our parks, and we're up almost 500,000 from last year, with looks like Streamway Parks leading the way. So again, what we have is valuable to the community, and I think we all already know that, but these numbers prove it out.
So just an aside, I was told that there was not a bike to be had Mother's Day weekend. Somebody was trying to buy a bike for their spouse, and there wasn't a single bike store that had a cruiser bike in stock anywhere. And then my best friend just tried to buy a stand-up paddleboard, and it's about a 4-week wait to get one from any supplier.
Oh, Heather, I didn't know that about the paddle boards, but I certainly know that about the bikes. I've heard a lot of people
So
talk about the shortage.
I think we're going to see a lot more people. I mean, since outdoor activities have been deemed the safest to participate in, I think we're going to continue to see. I know the playgrounds being open has been extremely well received.
Well, these are really good, healthy activities. So this is kind of in juxtaposition to what we've been going through. So
yeah.
Anyway, congratulations to staff for keeping those going and taking care of the public. Turning to the reports, one thing I noticed, and I've noticed this month after month, and this is for Chief Anderson, that I notice we have a lot of burglaries in our parking lots with people smashing windows and pulling out purses. Have the cameras caught any in this last batch? And forgive me, do we have I've forgotten, do we have signs in these parking lots warning people not to leave their purses in full view or to lock them up? And I don't mean just purses, belongings, I should say.
Steve, for probably a good 20 years, we've had flyers that we've made, and we go through our parking lots regularly and put these flyers warning our park visitors of car burglars, to keep their valuables out of sight. Next time you come out to the park, leave your stuff at home. Don't bring things, trying to warn them and prevent them from becoming a victim of these car burglaries. So yeah, we put flyers on all the time. We captured one car burglary on video at the Shawnee Mission Park dog off leash area. It seems like our cameras in some of these areas have been noticed and they've moved into other areas that don't have cameras now. So I think it is paying off.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Chief. I hope people, I guess you can only do what you can do if people aren't going to hide their belongings. But anyway, I keep seeing that. A couple more questions from reports, one for Bill Mawson and one for Rhonda. Bill, I see you met with a group of citizens wanting to construct a single track trail along Coffee Creek. What's going on there?
I did. I met with a group of young people with their parents who want to build a mountain bike trail along our paved trail. We have some extended wooded areas along some of those, along that paved trail, Steve. And so I am actually meeting with Urban Trail Co. next week to talk about the possibility. I was hesitant to do it just because 14 or 15-year-olds have an interest in it now. And if they were going to volunteer to build something, they may not have an interest in a year, 2 years, whatever. So I wanted to have a volunteer backing before we ventured into that kind of a private single track trail. So I'll keep y'all posted on that though, but thank you for noticing that.
So that's something that sounds like it's pretty, maybe imminent.
Yeah, I think it has potential. We have some extended real estate there in places where you can do some nice little loops and some linear features that could end up being mile long or so. It might be good for the neighborhood.
Any guess on a timeline? I mean, I won't hold you to it.
I will know more on after my meeting next week on Tuesday, and I'll report next month for you. So because I know the folks that are interested are wanting to do that this summer because they have the summer off with hardly any activities going on. So but the biggest part of that is to find kind of a local host. You know, every one of our mountain bike facilities has a local host that helps us manage it and helps us construct it, and they could provide guidance to the youngsters, the young men that want to help, and I think it would be a neat community building project. So I think it does have significant potential.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And last question then for Rhonda. In your report, you met with Puma, a local soccer association, on a possible partnership at the Heritage Soccer Complex. That's it. It's a Heritage Soccer Complex. I mean, that's interesting. I'd like to hear about it. And we have a lot to do to get that soccer complex into a position to be part of this partnership.
Yes, so we've since then had another meeting as well, and we're moving forward with them with a couple of things coming up. So the overreaching thought is that how could we partner together to really build a recreation league? They have a small recreation league, but they're basically a competitive soccer club. And so a recreation league would help to funnel children that wanted to become more competitive as they age into their competitive league. They also have resources that we don't have. They have professional coaches that could help educate not only our coaches, but children as well in a variety of ways. And so we're really just, it's a fact-finding mission right now, but they approached us with what we thought was a really good concept. And so we've met twice now, and we're vetting through what that might look like. This fall, we do plan to have a couple of, or maybe not this fall, I don't know if it's in July or August, some educational camps that they will spearhead, and we'll try to get the word out on a combined league. They have currently about, I want to say 132 children in their recreation league. And so the really great thing about that is we can combine those children with our league right now and start off with just a pretty darn good foundation and then grow it from there. It's a very exciting possibility. We've worked with Puma through the years. They were heavy at Stoll Park, and they're just a genuine group of folks that they really want to grow recreation soccer here in Kansas City. And Heritage would be a really great place for us to forge that partnership.
So, well, my question, and that sounds great. Do we have to do something financially to bring those fields up to par to make I remember all of our discussions about where we were putting our CIP and how much money we were going to have to put out there. And this is going to happen without us doing much, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we probably wouldn't use all the fields, as we grow the program, we would use more and more, but I think we can do this as is. And then it's a great foundation. If we did have CIP dollars in the future to upgrade those fields, then we would, we can prove that we've got the need for it out there. I think that's the beginning of it. But right now the fields are in great condition because they haven't been played on, and staff are working hard to keep them that way.
That's great. It's great to know that this could happen without us putting out a large sum of funds for it.
We have a really good relationship with this group, and they respect the JCPRD name. And so as we work through what that looks like in the future, we'll be bringing a contract to the board once we get that all vetted out. But as I said, this is in the very early stages of it. But by putting some of those camps out there and some of the educational pieces, we can move forward with that, and everybody benefits from that.
Great. Thank you. That's all I asked. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Good questions. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I had a couple things. And I think this is probably for Cliff. Wanted to know where we were with the Stone Ridge master plan process. We started down that path and then kind of got interrupted by COVID, and I didn't know where we were or what the next steps were.
So Cliff Middleton, Planning and Development Manager. Thank you, Heather. We did get interrupted, but we were, at the time we got interrupted, we were preparing for public input, and we changed directions with our consultant to do online public input. I think the last figure I heard, which is fairly recent, just within the last few days, that we had 602 people visit our survey site. So we think we are getting some really good comments for the consultant team, and they will be distilling those down and starting to develop concepts. We're probably a few months off of what our original schedule would have envisioned. We'd hope to bring you something by the end of the summer, but we think we'll still have something maybe mid-fall or so on this.
Good. I'm glad we've been able to continue with that. I wasn't sure where we were with it. And then one other just sort of comment. So many years ago, we had a little girl who competed on the KIPS gymnastics team. And she was actually the one that was sort of the genesis when we moved from the athletic training center over to the Mill Creek, that her family and some of us really pushed to put the foam pit in. For those of you who remember that, Bria was training at such a level that she needed the foam pit to be able to start training vaults. Well, her college career ended fairly unceremoniously in May. So she didn't get to compete at the national competition as a college senior. but she was still recognized as one of the top women's collegiate athletes in gymnastics this past year. She made the Division III All-American team and is officially retired from gymnastics. And I had spoken with Alexis, the head of our gymnastics program, about having Bria and her family in and hanging a plaque in the KIPS area, showing that Bria was the most outstanding gymnast to ever come out of our program at JCPRD. So we're going to do that, hopefully getting it scheduled and get it before she starts a job and moves away. But I think it's very important to recognize that we had a girl who started as a 5-6-year-old at the Athletic Training Center and is one of the top collegiate gymnasts in the country.
Thank you very much. Bill, I had a couple of questions for you. Are you planting sunflowers out at Heritage Park again?
Yes, George, we are. A gentleman who's planted them for us the last couple of years is planning to get those in the ground in the next week or so. So weather conditions are good, we'll get them in the ground before the 1st of July. So I wanted to give the gentleman who we paid to do it a couple of years ago the opportunity to do it again this year. So he was willing to do it. So just so the board knows, that costs us something less than $300. And I think there's a lot more enjoyment by the public for that than the cost of the planting.
And can you give us an update on Verhaeghe Park opening?
Yes, in fact, it's going to have a soft opening on Friday. It'll become a facility we open every morning and close every evening. We'll keep the shelter house closed for a while because there's still some work going on with regard to the electrical improvements. But the most important thing is the parking lot and playground will be open for public use starting Friday.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments from the board members?
Mr. Chairman, this is Leslie Riverola. I do have something, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you. So first, I just want to extend a tremendous thanks to Jeff and our park police officers. We did have an incident involving our family coming out of our neighborhood here, which is adjacent to Shawnee Mission Park. And unfortunately, a vehicle who actually sped up towards one of our children on a bicycle rather than stopping. As you can imagine, as a parent and somebody who enjoys these parks frequently, that's very concerning to me. Staff was extremely responsive, so I have nothing but just tremendous appreciation and respect for their swift response. I would ask that this item not be, I would like for this item to stay at the forefront of the work that we're doing. I think the number of visitors that we have to our parks right now, particularly in light of COVID and concerns with being indoors, we're just seeing astronomical visits, which is awesome. But that means we're also experiencing just unprecedented numbers of vehicles in our parks. And as somebody who is in Shawnee Mission Park on an average of 5 days a week, I can tell you right now, people are not slowing down. They do not stop for pedestrians. They do not stop for marked crosswalks. And frankly, I don't think that they care if there's children in them. And that scares me to death. And I think we have a duty to start looking at and immediate implementation of traffic calming in these areas that are high traffic, because it's just a matter of time before somebody is seriously injured.
Thank you for your perspective.
I was gonna say, Leslie, I told Jeff, my husband was at the marina a couple weeks ago with my daughter and some friends paddleboarding, and had similar comments that the park police were trying to keep people from doing things they weren't supposed to, but as soon as they walked away, it got, went right back to where it was.
Exactly.
So,
Any other comments? And great comments today. I appreciate everybody who participated and shared with us. Joanne, you want to go to upcoming meetings? Until she gets on, I will start at the Administrative Services, Culture and Recreation Committees are set on July 6th at 5:30 p.m. Parks and Golf Courses, and Safety and Outdoor Education Committees are due to meet on the same day, July 6th at 5:30, same time. And we have a Committee of the Whole meeting at 6 o'clock on that same day, July 6th, to discuss the compensation and benefits survey. And our next meeting, board meeting, our July board meeting is scheduled for July 15 at 7 p.m.
Correct.
And do we have any executive session items?
George, I just wanted to note, I'll be gone on July 6th. So Steve Baru or Bob Carlson, you'll need to be prepared to lead those discussions at PGC and Safety and Outdoor Education.
Okay.
Any executive committee, Jeff?
No, sir. Not tonight.
With that, I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming and participating.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a good evening.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
bye.
Good night.